everyone. Today we'll be walking through the process of building a business case for project portfolio management software. We're going to take just a minute and explain this and why we're going through this today. This is the time of year we hear from a lot of folks that are in the process of making a business case. Whether you're in the budget planning process and trying to use up the rest of your allotted budget on something useful for the coming year, or you feel you barely made it through this year without PPM and you know you won't make it through another year. Hopefully today's presentation helps you along your PPM journey, as this can be a more difficult process than some people realize. This is a Keyed provided webinar, and we are a PPM provider, but more than that, we've taken some learnings from going through this process alongside others, how we've helped them build their business case, and hopefully share with you some insights or angles you might not have thought of. With that, we'll get started with a few logistics while people are still joining. If you're having audio issues, I know you can't hear if you're having the audio issues, but hopefully you can see the screen. To try the phone audio, there should be a audio button, little headphone symbol, or logging off and back on helps too. Sometimes if the computer speakers aren't working or picking up, dialing in does help. If you haven't noticed, you are in listen only mode and we can't hear you. So any questions or issues, please enter them into the chat box. Today's event is being recorded. We get asked this a lot, so don't feel like you have to take notes or screenshots. We'll send both the presentation materials as well as a recording out to everyone that registered after the event. It takes about a day for us to get it put together, so look out for it tomorrow about this time. It may land in your spam folder, so if you're looking for it, check there first. You want to send it on to colleagues or refer to the information again. Sometimes we have people that have unsubscribed to our emails, so if you don't get it for some reason, feel free to contact us at info@keyeden.com and we'll get it on over to you. We are targeting a 1-hour presentation today, so hopefully you stick around for the whole webinar as we go through this presentation. We're going to try and reserve 15 minutes of that for question and answer, so any questions you have can be addressed at the end. Again, enter any questions you have into the Q&A box. We'll be checking that at the end. We also get asked a lot about PDU credits. Keyeden is not a registered education provider with PMI. They typically don't like software providers on that list, but due to the nature of our content, it does often qualify for credit, so you just have to enter it as self-directed learning, and PMI will review the content and give you credit for it as needed. We just don't have a number to give you or anything like that, so go straight to PMI with any PDU questions. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Lindsay Marymont. I'm on the marketing team here at Keyeden, and with me today is my colleague, Tony Antocha. We are building a business case today. Tony will be walking us through the presentation, talking through how to build a business case. He is our resident expert on the matter, having helped many, many customers build their business case for PPM. Prior to Keyeden, Tony was at PlanView, also helping and guiding customers along their PPM journey. One of the important things to note here is that we help build these business cases for prospects and customers and help along this journey, really looking for long-term partnerships and best fit for mutual success when we look at potential customers. Many organizations don't quite realize the complexity of implementing and adopting PPM, and that leads in a lot of wasted effort for both parties, which is not what we're after. Part of building the business case ensures we have aligned goals and mutual success regardless of the vendor of choice. That said, let's go ahead and talk through a quick agenda. When talking through building our business case, we'll start with why PPM matters, what it means to the organization, and why this is such a big deal and change for a lot of teams. Then we'll talk through how to set your PMO up for success and why this starts prior to any software implementation. We'll walk through a framework for your business case, why it's important to establish key stakeholders and who you will need to engage along the process, what sort of challenges you might come across, and pitfalls to avoid. We'll talk about establishing ROI for PPM and even give you some advice from the Garner experts that we have found useful as well. Finally, we'll wrap up and answer any questions you may have from the audience. Sounds like a solid agenda. We've got a good sized crowd here today. And with that, we'll get started. And give it over to Tony.
Hi, thanks, Lindsay. Let's make sure that our audio is proper. Sorry, everyone.
All right, well, let's try that again. I will be your foreman today. My name is Tony Intocha, as Lindsay had mentioned. So I have some experience working in the past prior to keyed in, so hopefully I will be a good foreman for you. Ask any questions along the way. We probably won't answer them until the end, but we did save some time for you at the end. So no need to worry. Likewise, if we don't get to all questions, we're happy to set some time up and speak individually. We're happy to dedicate some time for you. That said, let's start from the top. What does a typical PPM evaluation look like, right? Some of you may have done this in the past. Some of you maybe have done this with other solutions in the past as well outside of PPM, but typically there's this general formation that goes, you're gonna do some market research, you're gonna do some create some high level requirements, find some vendors, a big group of them from various sources. You'll do some evaluations and validate some of those, compare those notes internally with some level of stakeholders, shortlist those folks, choose a vendor, you're gonna find funding, and then you're gonna go live, kick off rather, then go live accordingly, right? That sounds pretty simple. Well, it's actually not always the case. So what is wrong with that? Well, number one is your timeline. So this is an interesting one because everyone kind of has this ASAP. When we speak to folks all the time, it's, hey, when do you need something in place by? What's a hard target go live is a question we like to ask. And the answer, I would say 95% of the time, is we need it as soon as possible. We need it yesterday. That's great. Yeah, I know you do. But at the same time, what's keeping us from getting there? What is driving that urgency? Is there regulatory concerns or targets you're trying to hit? Is there a budget timeline you're trying to hit? What's driving that urgency? But having some level of timeline helps, because then we can start to work backwards and build that plan. Budget. So if you have budget, great. This conversation might not be relevant to you, right? But if you don't, which is normally the case, you need to build for that budget. So with being able to build that budget, which we're going to help you do today, or help you quantify the value of what you're trying to deliver, you'll really help continue that momentum. Not having that, or not even having visibility into how to build that budget, can make it difficult, which we'll get into. And executive sponsorship is a biggie. I ask this question a lot to folks we speak with for the first time, because oftentimes they don't have it yet, and that's okay. Building a business case is a common scenario, but a big part is, do you have some level of visibility at the executive leadership level, some endorsement? And if you don't, what we typically find, and this is a stat from, I believe, CIO.com, which is if you don't have executive sponsorship, you're likely going to be wasting your efforts and at some point just make no decision at all. You have limited time, let's not waste it, basically. Functional requirements. So just so you know, have some level of functional requirements. What are your typical impacts, and how are they, at some point we'll quantify those impacts. And eventually we'll know other groups in the business too that have some requirements, but don't fret, you don't need to have all of these fleshed out, because most of the time they will change in the course of the evaluation period. You don't know everything about every PPM solution out there, or every challenge that they can solve. So those things do change, and eventually you might parse that out. What is a phase 1? What is a phase 2? In the first 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12, and what's the goal for years 2, years 3? Parsing those out over time, just be aware that you don't need to have those fleshed out at the beginning. They will come in the evaluation period. Emotional influence. So what do we mean by this? Sometimes some folks have experience using some solutions or tools in the past, or some way of doing things, so that can sometimes interfere with the evaluation process. That's the point of the evaluation. You want to basically use data and get the bias out, because there are some solutions out there that may be better or different for the situation you're in today. We might have used something successful in the past company, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best solution for today. And at the same time, emotional influence, what we mean by that is sometimes there's bureaucracy internally, right? So aligning the stakeholders internally as to what the best solution is helps alleviate that. So just poking some holes internally, really. The last thing I'll say, but a very important point that we'll get into later, process alignment. What do we do first? Process versus solution. This question comes up all the time. The good news is there's an answer for it, and we'll get into that a little bit later. All right, so where does that leave us? It is important, based on what we know can go wrong in your typical evaluation process, and to poke some holes in that, we do need to eventually understand, what is the business value? What is the ROI? What is the quantifiable number you can put into those impacts you currently have. And so it's important that we do this, because if we don't understand the positive fiscal impacts of any solution, PPM or other, there's a really good chance your organization will come to make no decision at all. And again, your time is wasted altogether, which we don't want to do. So you might have various levels of impacts and challenges today, or various groups or business units in your organization might have something similar or other, but ultimately they're going to roll up into one of these three things. Will they increase revenue in some fashion? Will they help decrease costs? Will they help mitigate risk? That is where we start to bring a quantifiable number to the challenge that you have. Otherwise, we're talking about soft ROI, which there is some there, but it's hard to justify if you're building a case. So real quick, before we get into the nitty gritty, let's talk at a high level. How can a PPM solution support this? Let's talk first to increase revenue. A couple of big strong points here: increasing utilization. Many PPM solutions, some more, some less, have really good, strong resource management, and it's a really important and expensive asset. If you can increase a few points on your utilization rates, that can make a big dent into increased revenue, including time to market. Decreasing costs, also a very biggie here, right? Single source of truth. PPM solutions, if you're not already aware, are meant to be a single source of truth, a hub for all of your projects, your resources, and your portfolio of work. So what that means is, what do we tie into and integrate with the things you need to keep? How can we reduce some redundancy and get rid of the things you don't need? That can decrease a lot of costs, including obvious time to get things done. That's a biggie. People want to save time of their day. They're spending nights, weekends, hours of their day just scouring from reconciling data. This is a place where you no longer have to do that. Things are in real time, and you can get it on the fly and understand what you need to do, who you need to go to make a better business decision much faster. And then mitigating risk. How do we quantify that? Well, now we have real-time visibility. So again, we can get to the things we need to very quickly and make better business decisions before something goes awry, or before it's been too late and we wasted time and effort on projects or resource portfolios that we shouldn't have been working on in the first place, i.e. project prioritization. How do we balance operation versus strategic work and balance our resources, which we all know we have limited resources for a lot of work we're obligated to execute. All right. With that,
we're going to start a little poll for you guys. Tony just kind of outlaid some of the business challenges we come across. We want to know from you guys what your top business challenges are and if some of this aligns. So go ahead and take a minute to fill out that poll. We are on a business case topic and we'd like some insight from the crowd. Is it intake and prioritization? That might be your big concern. Always have more work than you can take on. Resource management, you hear this one a lot. People never have enough people, never know where they should be, managing changes mid-flight. Or as projects in general, they're always unreliable, they always run over. Sometimes it's portfolio management, trying to get from project to the portfolio level. We know we need it, haven't been able to do it. Reporting, we hear that one again. A struggle, and of course all of the above is always an option as well. It might be a couple of these things, but we're just looking for the top challenge here, and we'll go ahead and close that poll down, show the results. Resource management looks like it is the winner here. We do hear that a lot, so very common. We also got a few people with all of it, of course, and then the next one up looks like intake and prioritization. Again, another thing that people use a PPM for, and another very good reason to build your business case. So that definitely aligns with some of the things we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, good feedback, thank you. And it's not uncommon. I'm not surprised by resource management. Gartner and everyone else says, we think the recent PMO symposium a couple of weeks ago we attended as well mentioned that resource management is still a hot button for most organizations, and the primary reason why people look for PPM solutions. Again, coming down to the ROI, resource management is an expensive challenge. So thank you. Well, let's continue. So now that we've talked about quantifying some of your challenges, it's really not as simple as that. And sometimes it's not as simple as grabbing a PPM solution, finding one quickly and saying, this is going to solve all your problems. And part of it is because internal processes is a challenge. We talked a little bit about process versus solution, but before we get into that, let's take a step back and say, what does your organization look like? Are you quite ready for it? Yes, no, we'll get into that. Sometimes we'll find that first, it's really just a complicated process. It's too complicated and it might need to be simplified. Maybe a bit more red tape, and it's hard to get things done. It's arduous to actually make change. On the other hand, it might be the opposite. You might lack some governance. You might, it might be a little bit of the wild, wild west where things are coming at every angle. You're accepting everything that comes your way with no governance in place. And of course, you've got limited resources to get everything under the sun done and on budget. And by the way, it's due tomorrow. And the last thing that's worth mentioning, and I'll say this because personally I hear this almost every conversation I have with our customers, which is change is hard. Like change is a hard thing, whether you have years of experience with PPM or any solution or other. People are familiar with what they're familiar with, right? So changing that status quo, again, it is not easy. So we'll get into how we can mitigate that, but it is something to be aware of prior to getting into this process, so you can start to poke holes in your internal processes and internal alignment as you start to build the case. All right, so in most organizations, the PMO is involved in every part of the organization if you have one. Not everyone has one. Sometimes they're striving for one. Sometimes it's a single person PMO. That's fine too. But what we typically find is they're responsible for prioritization, for process, for delivery and governance of a business, for delivering those critical initiatives that the leadership sets out. So strategic alignment. Now, the PMO specific role varies by organization. So it could be culture, politics, business needs, maturity. They're all factors in determining the overall structure. Some organizations may not have a formal PMO, as we mentioned, but oftentimes what we hear is the function and capabilities exist within that business unit. So it will evolve over time as the PMO will adapt to these challenges and to environmental changes. And some of those might be market shifts, change of business direction, internal reorgs happen, and sometimes competition change things as well. So how can we avoid and alleviate some of these common challenges? Now, it helps by understanding why you want a PMO, what are you setting out to achieve, what's the purpose of it? So there's 3 examples, and sometimes it's a mix or a hybrid here. For one, your PMO's purpose might be to be a center of excellence. This is to be a kind of a true strategic driver of the organization. So a central location to manage the business change. Another might be more simplified. It might be a common goal for the PMO, which is just execute on the project and portfolio management and try to manage some of the resources we have and best manage their utilization. And basically execution of the critical initiatives, not so much the planning. And what we typically find is a little bit of a hybrid. They're managing the top down and the bottom up, but it's really communicating it up to the C-level. So they would both support network for internal projects and be the facilitator for governance. So what we'll often find is PMOs are really the hub where they can communicate and report to CIO, CEO, CFO, what's the status, the health of our project portfolios and resources? And are we even working on the right work that aligns with the strategy you set forth? So how can we start to do that? So once you have a goal, let's say you have a goal, you have a purpose for your PMO. When we talk about PPM potentially to help orchestrate these goals, which is, again, the objective, it's not to be your silver bullet, it's to help you orchestrate, it's to be a tool to make you more efficient to achieve the goals you set forth. The first thing we want to make sure you do is, build some high-level requirements. Again, they will change over time, so don't worry too much. But identify all the other potential stakeholders. Who else, what other business units are touching projects and resources that might be shared or share the common goal of the C-suite? So who's your decision-making committee? Grab someone from each department, whether it's IT, R&D, new product development, whoever else touches the work and resources aligned to the strategy, make sure they're part of this as well and they are heard, because oftentimes we run into blocks if they don't anyway. Next, you'll want to develop a strategy with those stakeholders. So you have a game plan. You can now start to begin to make sense, to make your case for a PPM solution. So one thing, actually, I'll go to the next one. I'll mention a few bullets here. We'll talk about understanding constraints, because this is an important one, poking holes in what your process is internally to get this stuff done. Are you building a business case? Do you have budget? If you can get budget, when can you get it? What's the procurement process? Things like that. These are holes you might want to poke if you're not used to purchasing software generally. Do you need to build a business case, or maybe you don't, right? And if so, we can help you do that, or PPM vendors can help you do that at times. And I'll hopefully do as best we can today to help you at least conceptually understand how to quantify some of that, some of those challenges. So poke some holes, understand your constraints. Hit key milestones. So, you deliver projects all the time. Similar to managing a project, manage your needs and evaluation of a PPM that requires key milestones and metrics. So manage it like a project. You have tasks and milestones along the way to help achieve this goal. It's really no different. So when I work with folks to do this from the start of a journey to go live, I manage it like a project, because it helps us align what are the things we may need to get done. It's not every little thing in this task plan, but it's things that we should probably be aware of, whether it's procurement wise or whether it's requirements or fleshing out integrations or things like that. Security, these are things you want to flesh out, or at least make aware, rather than waiting for the last minute and realizing you can't make something work for whatever constraint. The last one is now building your business case. So now we start to outline goals and expectations, and you'll really need to start fleshing out your requirements a bit more, so you can start validating what those challenges are and quantifying what that means to the business. All right, so the first step in getting an agreement on what the organization needs from the PMO. So what we typically find is there's multiple stakeholders. We'll use this as an example. We've got your architect or your CIO, your VP, Barbara. We've got your foreman, PMO leader. We got Mike, and we've got your end users or your engineers, your team members, the folks in the boots on the ground, and they're doing all the execution, right? Stu. So we're going to go through, what we're going to do here is help you kind of understand, what do each of these stakeholders typically care about, and how can a PPM solution help achieve or quantify some of the challenges they have. With that, I'm going to start with Barbara. What does Barbara care about? Barbara cares about, Barbara. CIO, we're on the same page. The CIO cares about a few things. They care about high-level visibility. They care about digital transformations. They care about revenue-generating initiatives, reducing operational costs. They care about strategic alignment. So how can a PPM solution help you do that? Well, here's a few stats, and rather than me reading off of them, which I don't like to do because we'll share this afterwards, I'll give you some of my own 2 cents. PPM solutions can do a really good job with balancing strategic versus operational work. So understanding what you should take on, killing the things you should have killed a long time ago by doing some what if scenario modeling, which is massive in terms of saving costs and mitigating risk. And that also ties into resources. A lot of times we load balance based on what are our resource constraints, financial constraints. Hey, what if we do this versus that, or cut this out versus that? How will that impact the business? This can result in a much faster time to market, innovation, and reducing a lot of cost and risk. Another one is speed of delivery. According to CIO.com, CIOs who have adopted portfolio management have seen a 4x increase in speed of implementation of their projects and initiatives. That's a lot of ROI right there. Another stat that I think is worth mentioning is strategic alignment. This is a biggie because a lot of times we have no idea. We're working on all these projects, our resources are overworked, but we're not even working on the right things that align to the strategy, or maybe it's the wrong time for that strategy. So what we've found is a 5x increase in projects that are very well aligned, quote unquote, according to CIO.com, when implementing a portfolio management practice of some sort, which your PPM solution is meant to help you facilitate that process, facilitate that maturity and growth. So that's Barb, that's the CIO. So next we have the PMO. What do we typically hear that the PMO cares about? Well, they care about a couple of things because their job is to standardize process, be a transformation agent. Their job is to help, and they care about communicating business value based on the work being done. So again, we're talking about execution to strategy. Is the work we're doing aligned to what we're actually asked to achieve in the next, 6 months, year, 2 years beyond? And they care about reducing hours and days of wasted effort on manual activities. They care about getting their weekends back because they're tired of scouring for data and reconciling this data from various places. It's typically inaccurate by the time they get it. So how can a PPM solution help you achieve that? Single source of truth. We're going to say this a lot because it's a big deal. Right now, almost everyone we speak to that is a maturing organization, or even some that are on a mid-maturity scale, they oftentimes are on spreadsheets, and you'd be surprised how many very large organizations we'll speak with that have very low maturity in terms of practices and best practices and processes, and that's okay. What we want to do is just consolidate, and that is always the typical step one recommended, single source of truth. How can we, step one, get everything under one roof, connect what you need, integrate into various things as you need it. It might be an agile side, it might be an ITSM, it might be a financial ERP, and then reducing the things you don't need. You might have a lot of various tools and applications purchased over the years that really just redundant, you don't use and you don't need them, because a PPM solution oftentimes can reduce that redundancy. Get it all under one roof and tie into what you do, and that can save you a lot of time and effort. And I forget the average, I think it's at least 4 hours per project manager per week used or wasted rather on reporting various project status and reports. This kind of thing is done in real time in a PPM solution. So that's a lot of hard ROI. Another stat I think is worth mentioning is increased efficiency. Well, PMOs are oftentimes the resource managers, and they oftentimes are responsible for standardizing processes and making sure that they're getting the most out of their resources. As an example, if you saw as simple as a 5% increase in utilization, a 5% increase, not 10, 20, but 5% increase if you had roughly 150 resources, that can yield up to about $1 million in annual savings. There is some hard ROI with resource management. And the last thing I'll say to this is, organizations that achieve success with transformation projects, they give credit to the PM entity and the solutions they use. So there's a lot of value and credit given to PPM solutions over the last couple decades as they become a real need for the PMO. So who do we have next? We've got Stu. Stu's our boots on the ground. Stu, we love you. We got a lot of Stus, and they're busy and they're overworked, but what do they care about? Well, they care about successful projects. They care about their projects being done on time and on budget. They care about delivery. So how can a PPM solution help Stu? Well, again, number one is the single source of truth. They no longer have to scour data. They have one place that they can update their work. And hopefully, if it's a flexible solution, then they can come in and do it very easily, and it's easily adopted, which we'll talk to a little bit as well, because the change management, the adoption is a big piece. The garbage in, garbage out is something we hear all the time and a huge concern. But assuming you have a flexible solution, you can make it easy for Stu to come in, get what he needs to get done, get out, and get on with his day job, and that information rolls up in real time. That saves a lot of people a lot of time and effort and headache, rather than having to scour for this in various levels. Prioritizing your projects also helps Stu. Stu has resource constraints. So not everything is a must-have. If we can start to at least high, medium, low to start, if you're lower maturity, and then get into more scoring and weighting of prioritization, that's fine too. Again, a flexible PPM solution that's easily to configure can help you grow, and we'll talk to the process versus solution a little bit later, a bit more. But if you can prioritize some of your projects, it helps Stu, because most of the time, projects are prioritized based on resource constraints. Things are pushed back, but everything's accepted. How are you supposed to do that with limited resources? So PPM can help provide visibility into resource constraints, so you can basically effectively plan based on your capacity going forward. Brings us to another poll.
So we've talked through a little bit of who can benefit from PPM. Now we just want to get a sense of if you have an initiative going on in your organization right now. So we'll go ahead and fire up the poll, just to give us a quick yes, maybe, no, whether or not you have an initiative to implement PPM currently going on. Don't worry, we can't see individual results just like the last polling question. We just see the final results to let us know if you're trying to build this business case or if you're already in the throes of it. Just kind of see what's going on. Hopefully everyone's gotten a chance to answer that, and we'll close it down. Perfect. Looks like we've got a lot of people in the process now. Good to see. We have some of the people that are not quite there yet, but know that they need to be, and some that already are covered. So hopefully you already have something in place and you're not in that realm of need it but can't have it, because that's never fun to be in. So yeah, great. I'm glad there's a lot of people that are in this process right now, because hopefully some of this is helping you. All right, and we'll keep moving right along here.
Yeah, so this slide speaks to the PPM solution is not your silver bullet. That's what this slide speaks to. And thanks for sharing the feedback, by the way. Hopefully this is helpful for you. It doesn't mean by the end of this call you need to have everything flushed out. It's just to at least understand that there is a way to quantify what you're feeling. There is a way. It rolls up to one of those three things we talked about earlier. But coming back to this, look, PPM is not your silver bullet. It's a tool, it's a solution, it's whatever you want to call it, but it's meant to help you facilitate change and facilitate your maturity. That said, it requires some things to make it successful in our experience. It requires commitment. It requires top-down endorsement from the organization to implement and adopt a solution long-term. I like this point here. You consider the services and implementation. Yeah, depending, it's a case by case for the PPM solution, especially if it's cloud-based versus on-premise. But flush that out. Those are holes you're going to want to poke in your evaluation, because it does tie into how you need to help your expectations in a PPM implementation. So who's going to support this? You know, what's the expected support needed from your side versus the vendor or the solution provider? Do you need a champion? Do you need multiple champions or admins? What does it take in your day-to-day? What percentage of time? Some not much and some more. Those are things you're going to want to ask if you're not already doing that. The last note is a stat that we grabbed from CIO.com as well, is that 58% of organizations that don't understand the benefit of project management practices. Look, that's important to know, because that tells us that we need to be and provide proper training and education on the value of a PPM solution. And part of that is building the business case, of course, but also for the end users. One, is it easy for them to use? But two, helping them understand the why. Why are they doing this? Why hopping into a solution and inputting what you need to helps us achieve better things? That education will help you gain adoption. It will help you gain more champions along the way for the long-term solution, not the 12 months, 24 months solution. Continuing that. So we went from framing to 4 walls to a house. Now we need your decor, right? So people and a plan to execute. So one, who's involved? Is there admins involved versus general users? What champions are needed? Backup champions in case something happens. How do we mitigate change management? So again, talking about not just the how we're going to get this done, but why. Why does it matter to you? Why will this make your life better? Why will this help the company if you help us with this solution? You know, you may have some or no governance / processes now, and that's okay. But as you go through the journey, you'll find that a PPM solution will help actually stimulate your maturity growth. So get sort of chicken and egg question, process for solution, which we're going to get into in just a moment. We'll speak to what some good practices is when you're challenged with that question in your internal organization. So process or solution. Well, Some believe that you need to have all of your processes in place first. I've heard this many times. And then 6 months later, we realize, okay, we don't have that perfect process. We need something else to help us with that. Some believe that a PPM solution is their silver bullet. The answer to both of those, according to research and my experience, is that neither of those are the answer, but a hybrid is the answer. You certainly need to have some processes or governance in place. It doesn't need to be perfect by any means. It is extremely common. I would probably say off the cuff, 90% of the folks that we speak to for the first time are using nothing, or just starting a PMO or growing a PMO, and they're looking to now align the work that they have to the strategy and fix some challenges they have with their internal processes. They're using spreadsheets, emails, PowerPoints, they're all over the board and they don't have anything standardized. That is extremely common and that's okay. Likewise, if you're more medium or higher maturity, that's okay too. I think it's important to know that some practices need to be standardized or at least endorsed. Look, we're hoping to get to this and this is when and this is why. And then you speak to in the evaluations and validation of these PPM solutions, how can they help you do that? And are they flexible enough to help you grow? It's not just a, hey, we want you to build this based on what we need today. It's a, hey, this is gonna change because we're on a scale 1 out of 5, hoping to get to a 2, to a 3 at some point. How can we, what is the plan and what would it take both from the vendor side and the customer side? What does it take to do that? Is it flexible enough of a solution to help you do that? Those are good questions to ask. So again, the answer here is do them both simultaneously. Have some baseline level of project management practices, or at least some top-down endorsement as to where you want to be, but it by all means does not need to be fleshed out before you find a solution. And at the same time, PPM solution is not your silver bullet. You need to have some endorsement as to where you want to be, not just implement this software and hope it's going to solve your problems, because I can promise you it will not. Brings us to a little bit of stat. So Gartner, if you haven't checked out Gartner already, they've got some great data. We take some of it ourselves. And what does Gartner tell us? And we can share this report with you, by the way, as well. There's a building the business case from Gartner that is very valuable as well. What they tell us is you need 3 things to provide and gain ROI from a solution. That is to prove visibility, to prove data integrity, and to prove decision-making. That results in ROI. When we talked about this earlier, we said, okay, all these soft and hard challenges you're having, what does that mean? It really rolls up to those 3 things we talked about. How does it increase revenue? How does it decrease cost? And how does it help mitigate risk? Okay, let's talk about a few things. We'll dive into them a bit. So if we can gain visibility into project data, what would that do? Well, if you ask me, it can help you increase revenue. And it's going to help us do a couple things. One, as an example, would be invest in the right projects that are best for the business, not waste time and resource on the other. It's going to help us increase resource utilization. It's going to help with time to market. It can help decrease costs. How? By reducing redundancy, by shaving a lot of time and hours doing things from that were once manual into no longer having to do that. How does it help mitigate risk? A lot of ways. A couple of examples is finding the red flags, the risks, the issues much quicker and getting to the core of the issue prior to, rather than waiting months down the road and realizing, oh, we didn't fix that, or we went down a rabbit hole, or hey, we kept working on this when it should have killed that project a long time ago, and now we've wasted resource effort. So data integrity, single source of truth, how about that? For all projects, resources, and portfolios, that is meant to do. If you can find, again, a solution that's easy to, one, implement, but easy to, that aligns with adoption in terms of how easy is it to get in and use? Is it tailored for the right folks? Is it meant to make their lives easier, not harder? And again, coming down with a little bit of why, that massively helps with data integrity. So again, decision-making, real-time data sliced and diced and really any angle, PPM solutions that can help you do that, can help you make better business decisions faster, increase revenue, decrease costs, mitigate risk, all of the above. So a little discussion here about soft versus hard ROI. We'll use a couple of our examples, customer examples. We'll call them out. MedHost is an organization in Tennessee that we work with. They use us for their PMO. They tie into various applications as well. They increased their forecast accuracy with keyed in within the first year by 12% through improved PPM practices. These are hard dollars saved. And in examples like this, it really helps quantify those challenges you're having if you can put a dent into some of these things. That's one aspect of ROI of PPM solution, but as you know, they cover the gamut from the start to finish of a project. So there's a lot of aspects in this ROI. That's one example. Actually, Medhost, in addition, they cut their annual project management tools by 50% because there was just a lot of redundancy. They realized, okay, they didn't need this, they didn't need that. We can cut a few things out because we can do that internally and grow in it with the PPM solution itself. So where does that bring us? I want to sum up a couple things we talked about before we get into questions, because it's important to recap a few things we talked about. Again, 3 things. How does it increase revenue? How does it decrease costs? How does it mitigate risk? PPM solution, good news, is does all those things. It's up to how they do it depending on the vendor. That's one thing we flesh out in the validation period of the value in the evaluation. So recapping some of the things you want to look out for when we look at the typical life cycle of a PPM evaluation, keep the end in mind. Is there a goal, a timeline in place? Do you have a due date from something you're coming off of? Is it a regulatory due date? Do you have a budget due date? What is the urgency and why? Helps you build a timeline to evaluate, especially knowing that there are some things that come into play internally that, let's be honest, it never works in a streamlined fashion. You need a buffer with a little bit of time. So work backwards. Stakeholders, early and often, I think this is an important one as well. Endorsement really helps. You need some level of endorsement to keep the momentum. Oftentimes, it'll result in no decision if you do not. Doesn't always. You can help quantify this, but you're working upstream is all. Buying process constraints. What are your budget constraints? What's the buying process internally? Have you bought software before? If not, who has? Is there an RFP requirement for procurement? What does that entail? Who needs to do that? Is there a threshold of budget that gets you to that RFP place or not? Those are some of the questions you can ask the right folks and really get visibility from the top down. Having that visibility and endorsement will help. And in the end, the stuff we're talking about that we're helping solve helps the top down. If they don't support it, I don't know how this is going to last long term anyway. And then again, talking about the PPM vision with ROI, what's the purpose of your PMO, and how can what are the challenges that are driving that purpose, and how can we start to build the case by hard dollars, soft and hard dollars that help you build that case.
All right, so we'll actually do one more quick poll while you're getting into the question and answer period, and while we give you a quick little overview of who Keyden is. If you want to speak with a sales representative, just let us know. Again, we've gone through this process with numerous customers of ours and prospects along the way and seen if we have mutual alignment. So if you'd like to enlist our help or see a product demonstration from a sales representative, I'm not going to do a product pitch here today, but we can save that for the next conversation should you want one. We're happy to set it up. Just let us know in this quick little poll pop-up. And while you're answering that, we'll just give you a quick overview of who Keyden is. We don't want to spend too much time on this, but 3 things that we hope you walk away with about Keyden if you know nothing else. We are a Gartner rated PPM solution. We pride ourselves on our services and personal relationships with our customers. That actually shines through in a recent Gartner Peer Insights Customer Choice that was given to us due to our customer advocates and some of their acknowledgements that they gave us on this third-party review site that's conducted by Gartner. You can read all about those and what they have to say about us on the site. Feel free to check out Gartner Peer Insights. We also have some of these hard ROI dollars and some of this benefit that Tony was talking to. We have plenty of examples of it. We love to see customers succeed. When they succeed, we succeed. And so happy to provide any of that as well. But again, very proud of some of the things our customers are doing and some of the things that they've achieved through using better project portfolio management practices. And again, our customer service and support, the team we have with us on staff is absolutely stellar. They're wonderful. So if you get a chance to work with us, that would be wonderful. Again, just go ahead and enter any of your questions into the chat box. There's also, somebody was asking about the Gartner report that we mentioned. That one actually is in the chat box as well. So if you go to that link that Courtney dropped in there. You can go ahead and check out that report. We have license rights to it, so you're able to see how a partner builds their business case and some of the things that they talk about and what that entails within a business case report. Another question that came through the chat, do you have experience with PMO at consulting organizations? Tony, I believe this one is directed at you. If you want to go ahead and talk to some of your experience with PMO consulting.
Yeah, sure. So Keaton has worked with consulting shops in the past. We have a partner program at a high level. We can speak to that offline at some point individually, but we have worked with various PMO consulting organizations as it makes sense to. So happy to chat further on that. I don't think it makes sense to go any further than that on this call.
Yeah, and most of the time our sales executives, they perform more of a consulting role. So it's less of a sales role and more of a consulting role, again, helping them through this process and making sure there's mutual alignment in the end.
And there is a partner program. If it's worth the conversation and of interest, we can have that conversation offline as well.
Excellent. Another question that came through here into the Q&A box. Who do you integrate with? We get integration questions quite a bit. Tony, you want to talk about some of the top ones that you've helped integrate with?
Sure. So conceptually, PPM solutions integrate, we'll use IT as an example. Conceptually, it's agile solutions, ITSMs, and financial applications. So on the agile side, Jira is probably the most common, TFS, those types of things. Let's see, ITSM, Sharewell, ServiceNow as an ITSM, and financial, I mean, PeopleSoft, SAP, Oracle, and even on the back end of things, front end rather, Salesforce as a CRM is a common one. Other CRMs can be common depending on how the work is initiated. And on the back end, accounting, Intact, Sage Intact is a common one as well. So it just depends on what the use case is. Good news is you have an open API, and most cloud-based organizations do. Keaton does, as an example. We have an in-house integrations team, a very good one, and they tie in. We have very open APIs, and they'll tie into the right things that we need to after justifying the use case, understanding why. Then it's essentially just a mapping exercise into the application.
Excellent. Perfect. There's another one that came through. What maturity should we be at before we start seriously considering PPM? I know there's varying degrees of maturity, and it might be a little bit personalized as to how you see that and subjective. But maybe there's some key indicators you look for that might help. Any thoughts on that, Tony?
Sure. I'll probably be a little redundant from earlier conversation, but it's a little bit of gray area. It's a self-assessment as to, Gartner has their own maturity model. We speak to a lot of folks that are on the lower end that are striving to the higher end. Do you have some level of processes in place? If so, what do they are? Talk to those. If you have absolutely nothing, you have no endorsement, you might need to start standardizing something, or at least gaining some endorsement from the top down somewhere to understand what you're trying to do and why. But frankly, it's typically pretty low maturity with some practices and a lot of work and resources that are involved that you need to standardize because a lot of it's going to waste. So it can be fairly low, but you need some baseline with some endorsement is my recommendation.
Perfect. There are plenty of maturity models out there too, as Tony mentioned. Gartner has one, and Forrester has their own version that kind of gives you some indicators as to what to look for when you get to that point. Typically, when you have a lot of resources, more than 10, and across multiple projects, it becomes pretty cumbersome to manage in spreadsheets. There's another question here about our licensing model. We don't want to get too far into that. Again, we can save any sales calls or sales questions for any follow-ups, but do you want to just hit a high note of some of the licensing structure?
Sure, and what we could probably do in the chat is put the licensing breakdown link from our website in the chat box in a moment. But frankly, Keaton is an extremely flexible solution. It's 100% cloud-based, so our business model is licenses that we charge for annually, right? So we have the flexibility to break down a lot of different types of licenses. frankly, so it speaks to two things. So we can tailor it for the right folks to do what they need to get in and get out and get on with their day, which speaks well to adoption and change management as well. So we have, Keaton happens to have a lot of flexibility natively to do that. So our breakdown, we can share that in just a moment on what that looks like. Hopefully that helps.
Perfect. All right, I think most of the rest in here is comments. If there's any other questions, go ahead and drop them in there. If not, it looks like we'll end a couple minutes early here. Hang on the line just for another minute or two. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Tony. This was super helpful. I'm really happy we can walk through this business case. We wish you all good luck as you go through this process and build your business case internally. Hopefully what you heard here today helps you along the way. And again, we will be sharing these slides and recording that we covered today in an email follow-up within the next day or so. So go ahead and take a look out for that. If you want to send it along, share it, refer back to it, go ahead and use it as you wish.